So the recent data paints a very bleak picture of Yemen. The death toll for the civil war since 2015 has reached around 100,000 civilians, 16 million Yemenis, including 8.2 million children, need humanitarian assistance in order to get access to adequate sanitation and safe drinking water. In other words, 8.2 million children are slowly being poisoned by the water that they drink. As you know, most probably, that we are responsible for a good portion of this misery through our arms sales and support for the Saudi regime. But for the UK, this is nothing new. Some of you may remember our complicity in the genocide that occurred in East Timor in the 1970s, where a third of its population was wiped out by the Indonesian army, whom we armed and funded. At the time, there was barely any reporting of what the East Timorese had to go through. And to my knowledge, it's been quite similar with Yemen. For the most part, the general public in Britain are divorced from the experiences of the Yemeni people that make up those statistics. And our purpose, therefore, at London Students for Yemen is to translate those statistics into people. People with their own culture, people with their own history, and people with their own individual stories. And this is why Shadia will be reading out a testimony from Abdulellah Al-Fadhli, a Yemeni based in Sanaa, who on the 5th of September 2015 became the survivor of an aerial bombardment.
So, a disclaimer, some of the things that I'll be discussing are really distressing, but we felt that it was very necessary as this is the true nature of war. To begin with, I'd like to extend my thanks to Abdulellah Al-Fadhli, who actually gathered these stories straight from Sanaa in Yemen for us. But here is the account of what happened on September 5th, 2015. About 6 months after the outbreak of war in Yemen, while I was sleeping, I woke up to the sound of an explosion that shook the house very strongly. I rushed to the window to check the explosion site, where I saw clouds of dust and smoke, as well as fire rising from a large hangar of the University of Al-Iman, which was separated from our house by only a 10-metre wide street. At that time, it had become known to the population in the city of Sanaa that the aggressive bombing strategy was as follows. Bomb any targeted site at least twice, separated by a period of time not exceeding 3 to 5 minutes. In knowing this, I hurried to my parents to discuss our choices. I saw my father and grandmother in the hall, while my mother and my younger 16-year-old sister Rasha were stepping out of the kitchen holding the breakfast. My younger 20-year-old brother Nasser had left to go to college, and only my 22-year-old sister Ahlam stayed in her room. My father decided that we had to move immediately. I went back to my room to examine the effects of the first explosion. While I was preparing to leave, I felt a massive, thunderous explosion. As a result of the blast, I lost the sense of everything, and my body flew like a feather in the wind, pushed through the whole room and slammed into the wall. All I thought about at that moment of unconsciousness was my family. After partly regaining consciousness, I realised that a rocket had hit the house, and I got up. I sensed my way through the dust, smoke and flying debris, shouting, "Dad! Mum!" It was only a matter of seconds before I heard the voices of my father, mother and my 16-year-old sister. But I didn't hear the voice of my sister Ahlam, who hadn't left her room earlier. Everyone was astonished, shocked that our bodies were covered with wounds, bruises, dust and black powder. We stepped into the remaining half of Ahlam's room, which was hit by the rocket after it had penetrated and destroyed the 2-story house of my friend Yusuf al-Quraishi. The rocket destroyed my friend's house to the ground and exterminated my friend Yusuf, whose only remains were small scattered pieces of burnt flesh from his body. We shouted for Ahlam, Ahlam, over and over, but no answer. I screamed while hearing the engine sounds and the F-16 jets flying through the Sanaa skies like dragons seeking destruction. Let's leave before the jets strike us again, we decided. We rushed out of the house, trying to escape for our lives. As soon as we arrived to the street, we saw one of our neighbours driving his car away. I asked him to take my family with him, and he shouted, "Speed up," before a rocket lands among us. As soon as they moved away, I made my way back to the house, hoping I could find my beloved sister Ahlam alive under the rubble. It was only a few moments after I removed the rubble from the rest of my sister's room that I found her little foot, covered in blood. I cried for help, overwhelmed with anger and sadness. In the meantime, some of the neighbours and my younger brother Nasser arrived from the university and helped to get out my sister Ahlam, who had lost all traces of life. Before I could calm down, one of my neighbours ran in, shouting as loud as he could, "Your uncle's house was hit by a rocket." We went to look for survivors of my uncle, Mujahid Ibrahim Al-Fadhli's family. At the end of that terrible day, 8 bodies were pulled from the ruins. My beloved sister Ahlam, whose tiny body I pulled from between, whose body I pulled from between her room's wall and the kitchen's wall myself. Won't be seen by her colleagues at the Faculty of Commerce, Sanaa University after that day. 6 of my uncle's family members were lost. My uncle's wife, his elder married son Abdulmajid, and his wife and 3-year-old daughter Huwaida, whose bodies were crushed under one of the walls. His 25 and 18-year-old sons Noah, whose body was pierced by an iron bar, and Loy, whose body was shattered under tremendous rubble. The only survivor from my uncle's family was him, as he was serving with the United Nations peacekeeping forces in Sudan, as well as his 18-year-old son Adam, who rushed to open the windows and the doors in the 3rd floor to avoid damage from the pressure generated by the explosion forced after the first airstrike. Still, however, during that moment, the missile that hit the house damaged part of the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor was destroyed. This threw Adam to the roof of a neighbour's house next door. He suffered great burns covering his whole body. Even his friends could not recognise him after the blast. My beloved dear friend Yusuf al-Quraishi, who was only 25 years old and had just graduated from Business Management College at Sheba University, was amongst the many lost. When my uncle Mujahid, who was a UN employee himself, raised the complaint to the UN on the deliberate and repeated targeting of his home and his brother's house by the Saudi Emirati enemy F-16 jets, which terminated the lives of most of his family, the answer was simply that it was a mistake. I wondered, how can human lives be so cheap to these people? This is where Abdulellah completes his account. I'd just like to finish by saying thank you again to Ammar and Abdulellah for sharing their stories with us and for collecting the stories straight from Sanaa for us, and to Peace Pledge Uni as well for giving us a platform to stress the real and terrifying impacts of war upon all people, especially innocent civilians. So thank you.